Okay, so full confession, I was gonna go and film this intro in a Catholic church, but the sisters there were having none of that. Sorry, bad habit. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of what we're all about here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. In short, we take a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. And today we're continuing our horror movie supplement, the additional 100 subgenres to the original horror movie syllabus, and we're talking today about nunsploitation. Nunsploitation is a subgenre that really got big in the 1970s, and it admittedly kind of goes beyond horror. Like horror is almost like a subgenre of nunsploitation, which is really a subgenre of exploitation films. The movies tend to be, well, exploitation films, like what you'd expect. They are full of sex and violence and nudity, and are made to, basically get a cheap buck. And the nunsploitation subgenre of exploitation was basically that, but focusing on nuns. And sometimes these movies had a horror element, and that's what gives us the nunsploitation horror subgenre. These are movies, exploitation movies, that feature nuns, basically, usually in some sort of lurid or provocative or perverse and often violent scenario, sacrilegious, if you will. They really seem to focus less on the sexual aspect of these nunsploitation movies, which, the non-horror nunsploitation movies, a lot of them are very sexual in nature. They basically come off as like softcore pornography with like a nun fetish, frankly. And the horror ones maybe a little less so, but that's not to say they're devoid of like the perversion and the sensuality and the nudity and things like that, because we're going to be talking about some of that kind of stuff today. Really, when it comes to nunsploitation horror movies, what we're focusing on are movies that feature nuns and really kind of like double down or triple down on the sacrilegiousness of it, the perversity of it, the effrontery to God, the violation of the sacred order of the nun, and that's really where you see a lot of the horror derived from in these kinds of movies. And yes, there will be sexuality in there. Yes, there will be oftentimes be gore in there, violence, death, murder, all the good stuff. But really, I think that the crux of the nunsploitation movie, for horror movies at least, is that kind of corruption of the nun, corruption of something that is generally considered to be, sacred. And so that's really kind of the way we like to focus on the movies that we're going to talk about here today. Now, it's worth noting that some of the best examples of nunsploitation horror we've already talked about on the horror movie syllabus. We already talked about The Devils. We already talked about Alucarda. We talked about some of the really noteworthy examples of nunsploitation horror already. And so, one of the challenges of the horror movie supplement is that I'm not going to repeat movies that I've already talked about before, even though they fit really nicely here. I'm going to force myself to talk about something new. And that's what we're going to do today. We are going to talk about new, or at least not, new to the channel, nunsploitation movies. Honestly, most of these movies are a little bit old. There are a couple of newer, more modern movies on this video too, though, because while nunsploitation really had its heyday in the 70s and into the 80s, it stuck around. It still pops up every now and then. It's still got enough popularity to occasionally rear its ugly head, if you will, and still make an impact. Although I would say that the exploitation aspect of the movies has been kind of reduced, kind of tempered down a little bit, and that's kind of how we're going to look at these movies. We're gonna look at them in order of how exploitative they are, going from less exploitative to more exploitative, and we're going to rank them undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate level in accordance with that. But go ahead and take your seats, start paying attention before I wrap you on the knuckles with a ruler as we get into these nunsploitation horror movies. The first movie that we're going to talk about today, the undergraduate level selection, is The Nun. The Nun came out in 2018, and I almost feel compelled to include it because it's such a well-known and mainstream movie that's focused on a nun, even though the exploitation factor is very, very low in this movie compared to what we're going to talk about coming up. But it is something that's noteworthy enough to talk about here simply because it was just so well-known and so popular, and because they're franchising it. It's part of a franchise already. So, and we're going to dig into all that in just a minute. If you haven't seen the movie before, the story is about a convent that seems to be haunted by some sort of powerful demonic force, and a priest is assigned to investigate, and he takes with him a young nun to sort out the whole situation, assess it, determine whether or not there really is something supernatural going on, and then basically combat that supernatural force. And as they tend to do, hijinks abound as they enter the convent and confront this demon, the demon from the Conjuring universe. I'll stop there so it's a not spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen it before, but probably most of you have, because this was an insanely popular movie. Like I alluded to, this movie was very mainstream, very popular, and it's part of the Conjuring universe, which is a big horror franchise that's going on right now. And this is, from what I've read, the most financially successful of the franchise, which blows me away, frankly, because these movies are really popular and they make a lot of money. So for this one to be like the most popular or the most financially popular is a shock to me. It is because it's not even in the main Conjuring universe, it's a spin-off of it. And well, we've talked about the Conjuring universe in terms of the original movies, and we've touched on some of the spin-offs. We haven't touched on this one yet. And it was because I kind of knew I was going to talk about Nunsploitation, so I set this one aside. But also because, I'll be honest, this is not a favorite movie of mine. This is a movie that I don't think I definitely don't think it holds up to the movies we're about to talk about, but I don't even think it holds up to the other Conjuring movies, if I'm being honest. I feel like the production values of this movie are really strong, which is a kind of a trademark or calling card of the Conjuring universe. The production values are good. They look slick. They're well produced. They're shot competently. The actors are solid. Everything is good in the movies. It's just whether or not there's anything more to it than that. And this is a movie that, unlike some of the other Conjuring movies, I feel really falls short in that department. Now let's get this out of the way right off the bat. I actually like the Conjuring series. I know a lot of people out there don't. I know there's a lot of people who have issues with Ed and Lorraine Warren, the protagonists of the movies, and that's fine. Totally valid position to be in. I think the movies are good for the most part. They vary in quality, but like I like the first one a lot. The second Annabelle is really good. We've talked about this already, but this is one that I don't think measures up to the quality of the other movies. So basing it even on its own standards, its own franchise standards, it falls short for me because it's just kind of a meh story, or as the kids like to say, it's mid. It's not a bad story, but it's not a particularly interesting or good story too. There's a little bit of a mystery there that doesn't really feel tremendously compelling to me. And so there's a lot of time spent in the investigation of what's going on in this convent that doesn't really tickle me. It doesn't really do much for me. So then what you're really doing is just waiting for the cheap jump scares that come out of this movie. And they come up, and they come up frequent enough, I guess, to make it palatable for most people, but not so much for me. And honestly, while this movie was successful, financially, I don't think it has the best of opinion, like a reputation. It definitely wasn't critically loved. And I don't feel like when I talk to horror fans, nobody seems to love this movie. Everybody saw it, but nobody seems like it's their favorite Conjuring movie, and definitely not their favorite nun movie or favorite, religious horror movie, for sure. Like I said, it's made well, but I don't think that's enough for people to fall in love with it. But I will give credit where it's due. It does look good. It's got some decent atmosphere in it, and the actors are actually doing a good job. Damien Bashir playing the priest, and he's always good. And Thaisa Farmiga, who I like quite a bit, is really good in this as well. She's kind of shaping up into being a really good scream queen in her own right. But the interesting thing about her casting in here is that she is the little sister of Vera Farmiga, who plays Lorraine Warren in the Conjuring series, and inexplicably, there's no relation between the two characters. Like, I thought for sure that Thaisa's nun was going to be some sort of ancestor to Vera Farmiga's Lorraine Warren. I thought for sure that was going to be the quote-unquote surprise, and I say quote-unquote because the family resemblance between the two is very strong. They look very much alike. They are clearly, obviously, siblings, and the fact that this movie doesn't do anything with that is a bit of a disappointment. I was a little bummed out to see that they didn't leverage that, because I wanted there to be a connection. I wanted there to be a better tie-in into the Conjuring universe, other than just, oh, this demon Valak that looks like a nun is the same one from the Conjuring universe. And that's my issue with the whole movie, is just, it feels like there could have been more that could have been done with this, and they were just really kind of relying on or resting on their laurels that they had a cool, scary nun design. Everybody thought that nun design from the Conjuring movies was really creepy and scary, because it was. And then they're like, well, let's make a spin-off of that because people thought that was scary. And they're like, story schmory. Let's just put the scary nun in there. And that's how it felt. It felt a little bit lazy. And so I don't love it. I don't hate it. I'm not mad at it. I watched it again for this video. It's fine. It's fine. It doesn't feel like a painful experience. I don't feel like it's a waste of my time. But, I do also check my phone while I'm watching it because it's not that deep. It's not that interesting. And it doesn't warrant a sequel other than the fact that it made a bunch of money, but a sequel it's getting nonetheless. At the time of recording this, I think the sequel comes out next week. So I haven't seen it at the time of recording this, but it's probably out by the time you're watching this. But I probably still would have seen it because I'm not planning on rushing out to see this movie because, and that's the thing. I'm bringing it up here not because I think it's a great movie. I don't even think it's a must-see movie. It's more because everybody has seen it, because people do talk about it. It gets acknowledged all the time. It gets referenced all the time. But I don't think anybody is passionate about it. If I'm wrong and you are passionate about it, please let me know in the comments below what it is about the movie that really does it for you. No wrong opinions here, man. It's not for me. Like, it doesn't really tickle my fancy, but I am interested in hearing what you have to say about it. So if you have thoughts on it, leave them in the comments below. And of course, if you haven't seen it before, I've talked about it. Listen to what other people say about it in the comments and decide for yourself if it's worth the time. The second movie that we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is The Other Hell. The Other Hell, also known as L'altro inferno, is a 1981 film from Italy, and it is a little bit more on the exploitation tip than The Nun. It's something that really is kind of coming out during that exploitation heyday, or towards the tail end of the exploitation or nunsploitation heyday, and is really trying to capture that audience and ride that wave. And it's unabashed in doing so, and it's all the better for it. And the movie is a lesser known one, I think, but it's also an interesting one to talk about it. So let's go ahead and talk about it. If you haven't seen it before, the story is often kind of referred to as Carrie in a convent. And I think that's a pretty apt description of the movie, as it's dealing with a psychic killer, basically. And I'm spoiling the movie slightly by saying this, but essentially it's got the idea of an illegitimate daughter that is a psychic killer. And she's, tormenting this nunnery, this convent. And of course, hijinks are abounding right and left as they try to solve the mystery of what is happening, who's doing this, and why. And we'll stop there because I've spoiled it enough as it is. But it's hard to not talk about this movie and not talk about that Carrie in a convent tagline. It's not an official tagline. It's just one of the ways that one of the directors of the movie described it. And I think it's very apt because it's a great selling point, because Carrie in a convent, I'm down for that. And I'm down for this movie. The movie's filmmakers are two guys, Bruno Mattei, who has apparently done, he's an Italian director who's done a lot of exploitation movies. It's kind of what he's known for. And Claudio Fragasso, who is probably most famous for directing Troll 2. Now, the two of these guys kind of had a partnership working on movies together for like a decade. They've worked together for a long time. And what's interesting about this one is that they pitched this movie in conjunction with another movie, a movie called The True Story of the Nun of Monza. And they decided that they'd make both of these at the same time so that the studio would give them enough money and they'd make two movies basically for the price of one, with Mattei kind of taking the lead on this one, and Fragazzo, I think, is taking the lead on the other one. Or it's a little unclear. Fragazzo was more of a writer, but he did do some directing, again, Troll 2. But he tells some interesting stories about how Mattei was better about getting the stuff that he needed for the movies, and Fragazzo was kind of taking the scraps or whatever. But they made both these movies at the same time, sharing sets, sharing actors, sharing resources, equipment, etc. And the other one, the Nun from Monza, I've not seen it, so I'm not really familiar with it. But by all accounts, this is the better of the two movies, and it really is more of the horror movie of the two movies. And that's what I like about it, is it's leaning into this occult aspect and the sacrilegious aspect of it much more solidly than the Nun of Monza, which is a little bit more of just like your exploitation movie. Knowing that the way the movie was made, you're kind of being done on the cheap and done in conjunction with another movie, kind of excuses some of the flaws of the movie. It's budget. You can tell it's budget, but for the fact that it's a budget, they're putting their money up on the screen, man. It actually looks really good, and I'm going to credit Mattei with that because he cites Argento, Dario Argento, as a influence, and you can kind of see it in this movie. This movie has an Argento style. It has an interesting, rich color palette and just really cool atmosphere and just interesting visuals and camera angles that evoke an Argento style. is not touching the master. It's not Argento, but you can see the influence. I definitely thought this when I was watching it, and then when I did the research, yeah, he confirms it. Now, I guess a lot of people say that it feels like maybe he ripped off Inferno. I guess I can kind of see that, but I don't really feel like that's the case. And Matei definitely says that while he was influenced by Argento, he's not ripping off Inferno. And honestly, that kind of tracks because both of those movies would have been in production around the same time, so he wouldn't have known much about what Inferno was going to be unless he was actually on set with Argento, which may be the case. I couldn't find anything about that when I was doing the research for this video, but I don't think he's ripping off Inferno. And again, the stories are different enough that I don't think that there really is that aspect of it. But does it feel a little bit like Argento light? Yeah, maybe, but that's not a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. They mimic Argento's, lighting and color palette and some of the, the surreal aspects of things, and they do it to great effect. They even use Goblin music in the movie, which is great. Now, apparently, they didn't actually have Goblin score the movie because it would have been too expensive, so they just, I guess they had a hookup at the publishing company or something, and were able to get a discount on like pre-existing Goblin records. That they were able to use the music from that. But whatever the case is, it works really well. The whole movie is done again on the cheap, but it looks good. It feels good, and it definitely is capturing a mood or an atmosphere and setting a tone that I really liked. And I really do like the payoff of the movie. I kind of said I spoiled it a little bit for you, but I didn't spoil the whole bit. And I think it's definitely worth watching to let that mystery unfold. Definitely more compelling of a mystery than The Nun, for sure. This one definitely has more of an interesting angle, an interesting backstory that isn't 100% super obvious. And then where it goes is a lot of fun. And I don't know, it really is hitting that exploitation button for me. It's not crazy like exploitative. It's not, having crazy sex stuff like this. More hinting at stuff than it is, actually showing a lot of stuff. But it's still got that exploitation feel. It's still got that little bit of that sleazy 70s feel, even though this is 81. It really is hitting those notes. And again, all the better for it. It really is a fun movie. And again, one that seems like it's a little lesser known. But hopefully, if you haven't seen it, you'll give it a chance and check it out and let me know what you think. But if you have seen it, let me know your thoughts in the comments below because like I said, I really like this one. I feel like the Argento nods are beneficial and make the movie more interesting to me, but maybe you find it just to be a straight up ripoff. If you do, let me know in the comments below and let's talk about it. And the last Nunsploitation movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is To the Devil, a Daughter. To the Devil, a Daughter came out in 1976 and stars legendary Christopher Lee and is really leaning into the exploitation aspect of this movie, of the movie, quite a bit. It really is exploitative, like not just by what's on screen, but also by like the stuff going on behind the scenes. But we're gonna explain all that as we dig into it a little bit deeper. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about an American writer who has been tasked by a friend to protect his daughter from a satanic cult. This cult has made her a nun in their religion, and they are now pursuing her for some sort of impending ritual that they need her for. And this this American writer, is trying to A, protect her from the cult, and B, uncover the story because that's kind of what he does. And he's got to face up against their religious leader Christopher Lee, and hijinks abound, of course, as they do. But I'll stop there, not to spoil it, because out of the movies we've talked about, this is the one that I think probably has the most interesting mystery to it, even though I don't think that mystery gets resolved or solved as well as it could have been. It's a great setup, but the execution maybe isn't great. But I don't care because I find this movie to be very, very fun. This movie, like I said, is leaning into the exploitation aspect quite a bit. What you've got here is an excommunicated sect of Catholicism, a priest and a bunch of nuns that have been booted out from the church because they're doing sacrilegious things, basically becoming a satanic cult and worshiping some sort of demon rather than God. And they're really leaning into like the sex magic aspect of this. Like if you ever wanted to see Christopher Lee taking part in an orgy, this is the movie for you. And really, who doesn't want to see that? This movie is not shy about showing the sexuality and the sex and the gore and the sacrilegiousness of it. It's like the perversity of taking these sacred things and just like perverting them, like the crucifix. Like what it does with the crucifix is very perverse. If you're a Catholic, it's going to be particularly upsetting to you if you're very devout about these things. And it's doing it with glee. And I find that to be very, very fun. In addition to Christopher Lee, you've also got Denholm Elliott, who plays the father of the girl, and he's most famous from the Indiana Jones movies as Marcus Brody. I actually enjoy him quite a bit. And then you've got Nastassja Kinski as the daughter, as the teenage daughter, and that's interesting because this is an early role for her, and she is 14 years old. I think she's playing like 17, just about to turn 18 in the movie, because that's the whole thing is she's turning 18, and it's all part of this ritual. But she's 14 when she's making this movie, and she's beautiful in the movie, and that's part of what she's there for. She's supposed to have this, beautiful ingenue look, this naive young girl who's very attractive, and it's also part of the exploitation, or I was alluding to the exploitation behind the scenes, because she's 14 years old and she does full frontal nudity in this movie. And it's not full frontal nudity in like a non-sexual way either. It's like full frontal nudity, like she's tempting somebody to try to to allure them and entrap them. And it's wildly uncomfortable knowing that she is 14. It's uncomfortable in the context of the movie because she's supposed to be a child still in the movie, but she's younger in real life than she's playing in the movie. So it's even more uncomfortable. It's something that Nastassja Kinski has said she kind of regrets now at this point. And I don't blame her, really. Like, you probably could have accomplished this scene without the actual nudity, but that's also a bit of an issue because throughout the movie, there is a lot of sexualizing of her. There's a lot of sexualizing of nuns in general in the movie, but her in particular, like she's really sexualized. Like, it's very Lolita style sexualization of her, but it doesn't go full on nude to this one part. And all of it's just a little uncomfortable knowing how young she is, especially by today's standards. But I'd say even in the 70s, this was probably controversial and uncomfortable. But it really is leaning into that exploitation hard because they're literally being exploitative of an underage girl, for better or for worse, and it's really for worse, frankly. But despite this, I still wind up enjoying the movie quite a lot because it's unabashedly, gleefully sacrilegious. It really is just embracing this notion of satanic cults, the perversity of religion, just how easily it's corrupted and how widespread it can be. It's fun, and it's a lot of fun in part because Christopher Lee just hamming it up, just being over the top, malicious and evil and maniacal. I absolutely love it. And so for me, it overcomes that uncomfortableness. It may not for you. I bring it up because it's important. You've got to bring it up. For me, it's a fun occult story. I like occult stuff. This is really like tripling down on the occult stuff. Again, admittedly, the plot meanders a bit. There's a lot of water treading in this as this writer is exploring what's going on and trying to get to the truth of this religious sex cult, the demon worshiper situation. But so it takes its time getting there. But there's always enough hijinks going on and enough interesting performances for me to be entertained. So for me, it's working like gangbusters. For me, I'm really into it. Mileage may vary on this one. So once again, I'm going to kind of give the caveat. If you check this one out, just be aware that it may not be for you. It may not be for everybody. But I would be interested in hearing how your experience goes if you do check it out. And of course, if you've seen it, give me your opinions in the comments below. Does the Nastassja Kinski stuff, is it just a deal breaker? Is it just too much? Or are you able still to have a good time? Or is it just that you're just not having a good time anyways? It's just not hitting for you? Because it hits for me, doesn't mean it hits for everybody. Let's go ahead and talk about it in the comments below. So that's going to do it for our study of the nunsploitation horror subgenre. But if you like these types of movies, I've got some extra credit movies to talk about. So let's jump into those right now. The first extra credit movie I'm going to mention is called Dark Waters. Dark Waters came out in 1993 or 1994. It's a little unclear to me because different sources on the internet say different things. Wikipedia versus IMDb, and it's a little unclear, but it's 1993 or 1994. And it's an interesting one because it's another one that is a little lesser known, and there's, I think, a different movie called Dark Waters that is more well known. There's nothing to do with nunsploitation. So this one maybe is lesser known and maybe not quite as mainstream or whatever, but it's definitely one that I enjoy and I wanted to talk about it and tell you about it and share with you here. If you haven't seen it before, the story is about a young woman whose dad has died, and he had been giving donations and supporting this convent on this island, and she is planning on continuing supporting them, but she would like to know more about the convent because apparently her mother had stayed there, and so she's very curious to know a little bit more about her past and what's going on. And she starts to unravel a mystery that is very strange, very occult, and very, very out there. And I'm going to stop there so as to not spoil it, because once again, we've got a pretty good mystery brewing, and we definitely don't want to ruin it for you if you haven't seen it. Out of all the mystery stories to be unraveled in these kinds of movies, I think this one is probably the most effective, because it really is a compelling mystery that I couldn't have put together. I didn't really see it coming. Now, maybe you will, but I definitely didn't see it coming. But I really, really liked where it wound up. And I'm not going to spoil it for you, of course, but I will say this. The movie's got a lot of comparisons again to Argento. I see it a little less than I did in The Other Hell, but I do see the Argento comparisons here as well. But it also has a lot of talk about being Lovecraftian in nature. And again, I don't want to spoil things too much, but I definitely see that. I definitely see the Lovecraft illusions in this movie, and that's great. And apparently it's all by design. The director's name is Mariano Baino. I'm not really familiar with him and what he's done, but I like what he's done here. He really sets a tone. He really has a great eye. He does have a bit of an Argento eye. Again, nowhere near as good as Argento himself, but again, I see the comparisons, and I think he's made this movie really, really well. He's getting good performances out of his actors. The mystery is really well paced, and it's giving me what I want, in enough degree that I'm feeling satisfied. Once again, it's scraping that exploitation aspect pretty well. There's a lot of sensuality that's hinted at, something like that, but it's not getting tremendously overtly obvious with it. There is nudity. There is the sacrilegious aspect of it, the perversion of sacred stuff. It really is doing all the nunsploitation stuff you want it to do, but the mystery is really what's driving it. And then like the effects and the gore and stuff like that is really what brings it home. The movie's ending is great. I really, really like it. And that's what made me want to include this one, because there's a lot of nunsploitation movies we could talk about. But this one, I just really enjoy the ending, and I don't feel like people talk about it as much. So that's why I thought I'd bring it up and let you guys know about it in case you hadn't seen it and maybe you check it out. It is one I'd recommend. I don't think it's as difficult of a watch as like To the Devil a Daughter. If you have faith, especially Catholic faith, maybe this is going to be a little bit of an issue for you, because there is some stuff in there that's maybe a little taboo. But again, it's not 14-year-old naked, so there's that. But it is a fun movie, and again, I really like the way it was made. And I really like the mystery, and I really like the resolution. So for me, this is a recommend. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And of course, if you've seen it, let's talk about it, because I love talking about these things. The next extra credit movie I'm going to talk about is Saint Agatha. Saint Agatha came out in 2018. It's a rather recent movie, and it's directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed many of the Saw movies. And that's important because it kind of sheds a little bit of light on what we're going to talk about when we talk about this movie. But it's an interesting one because it's definitely showing that modern nunsploitation still is a thing, still alive and well, and this is a movie that's a good example of it. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a young pregnant woman in the 1950s who gets sent to a convent because she has no other place to go. She's left her abusive father, her boyfriend can't afford to take care of her, and so she goes to the convent to try to get basically support while she delivers her baby. But she starts to realize that the convent is not only strict and stern, but really kind of inappropriate and mysterious, and there's something nefarious going on. Is it supernatural? Is it just evil? Is it financial? We don't really know, but our protagonist is going to try to solve the mystery at her peril, and we'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you. But this movie is surprisingly very good. Like I said, it's modern nunsploitation, and what I mean by that is that you've got the whole nun aspect of it, you've got the sacrilegious aspect of it, the perversion of the sacred. You've got some gore, stuff like that. You've got a little bit of sexuality in there, but it's not as exploitative as like To the Devil a Daughter. It's not really played for titillation as much. But you've got some nudity, you've got some sex, you've got the stuff that you'd expect in there, but it's also got a modern sensibility. So it pulls its punches a little bit with some of the exploitation stuff, which might be a good thing, frankly. But it also just looks really slick. A lot of the other movies we talked about, The Nun Accepted, look dated. They have that kind of a grindhousey kind of look to them, which adds to the experience, frankly, when you're talking about nunsploitation. This movie, very clean, very slick. It looks very good. And if you've seen Saw movies, you kind of have an idea of the aesthetic. It doesn't look as dingy and dark like that, but they've set it in like a rundown, like halfway house, and it really starts to evoke that kind of feel of like I don't want to say torture porn because it's not a torture porn movie, but it's got a similar aesthetic to that, the way it's lit and the way things are run down. And then, of course, what happens to these young women that are put there into this halfway house, and the way they're treated, and how they're flat out tortured. I mean, they're psychologically tortured right off the bat. But then when they get out of line, they get physically tortured. There is a tongue cutting scene that is extremely effective. And like when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, I see. This is the dude who did Saw. I get it. Like you really can see it. And then of course there's an umbilical cord scene towards the end of the movie that is absolutely fantastic. Very imaginative. It probably requires some serious suspension of disbelief, but it's so much fun that to me it pushes this firmly into nunsploitation territory. It's definitely having fun with the gore. It's definitely having a good time. This movie's kind of taking itself seriously for the most part, and it can be a little bit of a difficult watch to see these women being, subjected to abuse and not, being taken care of for well and being shamed and stuff like that. It can be a little bit of a challenge to watch, especially because the actors are all really good in this. Like every actor in this movie is really good. The main girl apparently hasn't done a lot of work. I looked her up, and there wasn't much to her. And then of course the mother superior, if you will, the main nun, is excellent, and we've seen her in a few things. Like the thing that lived up to mine, I've seen her in is Cougar Town, but she's been in a lot of stuff. But the acting is good. It's selling the drama of this movie really really well. It's a solid drama. You could take out the horror aspects of this and have a pretty solid drama, but the horror aspects are what really make this movie a lot of fun. There is a lot of stuff in here that is just over the top and gory, and really it's not a lot. It's not like the movie's chock full of gore and over the top stuff. It comes in like moments, and that's what makes it a little more effective because it kind of just slaps you upside the head. Like most of the time you're feeling like this dramatic movie, and you're seeing these women getting verbally abused, and they're trying to figure out ways to escape, and they're getting mentally broken down, and then somebody's tongue gets cut out of nowhere, and it's just wild. And I really dig that. If I have a nitpick about the movie, it's that the movie's ending, the very last scene of the movie, not the ending and over, the resolution of the story is perfectly fine. But the last scene felt a little unnecessary. It felt a little like trying to franchise out or something like that. And I was a little disappointed that, but that is a minor nitpick to what is otherwise, I think, a really excellent movie. This is one that I strongly considered adding onto the syllabus proper. I just didn't want to bump into the other ones. I almost bumped The Nun for this one, but The Nun is just so mainstream that I felt like I had to include it. But this is a better movie than The Nun. It has less jump scares, so if you're a jump scare person, you're gonna like The Nun better. But this is definitely a better made and better executed story. So I would definitely recommend this one over The Nun, and I'd recommend this one in general. If you haven't seen this one, check it out. Like I said, modern nunsploitation, and it's really good. Much less offensive, but still got some really cool gory stuff. And I think you will really enjoy it. So if you haven't seen it, check it out and let me know what you think. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to mention is a movie called Killer Nun. Killer Nun came out in 1979 and is another Italian nunsploitation horror movie, and it comes out during like the heyday of nunsploitation again, just like the other hell. And it is definitely a movie that is an interesting one to talk about because of its connection to real life. That is the noteworthy thing about this movie, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a nun who is suffering from a brain tumor, or maybe she had a brain tumor. It's a little bit ambiguous, but she's definitely off. She's definitely not feeling herself, and she's starting to get more and more mean and aggressive and antagonistical to the patients in a geriatric hospital where her and the other nuns work. They take care of these old people, and then deaths start happening, and she's not quite sure, is it actually her who's committing these killings, or is it somebody else, and she's just going crazy. And we're gonna go ahead and stop there so as to not spoil it for you. But once again, we've got another mystery aspect to these things that works rather well. This one though, while the mystery works fairly well and the movie is good, you're expecting something a little different when you hear the title Killer Nun. It sounds much more exploitative than it actually is. It sounds like it's going to be just a wild exploitation romp, just nunsploitation, nun killer. And really, what it is it's kind of inspired by this real life nun who killed a bunch of patients in a geriatric hospital. She was basically kind of like a mercy killer kind of thing. It wasn't even a mercy killer. I think she actually killed them because she wanted to kill them, not to put them out of their misery. But she wasn't like, slicing and dicing, slashing them. It was like she had poisoned them and stuff like that. And so this is the movie that's inspired by that. So when you hear a killer nun, you're thinking like a slasher nun, right? Or maybe like a gun-toting nun. But that's not what you get here. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a little misleading. The title had expectations that didn't live up to, and that's a little bit of a bummer because I went into this one feeling very excited about it, and it came out being perfectly fine, but not what I was expecting. And so it's still a nunsploitation movie. It's still got that sexuality to it, but the sexuality is a little mild. Like there's nudity in it, and there's that hint of lesbianism that so many of the nunsploitation movies that are horror movies really dive into. Like lesbian nuns is like a big thing. Now, we didn't mention that earlier, but it is. And this movie's kind of got that, but it kind of just like brushes up against it. Doesn't really full on go into that. Again, none of these movies are going into like the softcore porn aspect of it. It really is just kind of alluding to this sexuality and got some nudity and stuff like that. But it really isn't as going as far as it could be, especially because the main woman, who's quite good in the movie, she's not, and her name escapes me right now. But if I can think of it, I'll put it up on the screen. But she is known for being like a nude model and stuff, and doing kind of nude scenes like that. But she doesn't do it here. Now she's older here. She's middle aged at this point. She's close to middle age at this point. And so I don't know if she was just kind of maybe not comfortable doing that kind of stuff anymore. But it's noticeable in the movie, because she is kind of shown in these like alluring situations and stuff like that, but she doesn't ever actually like strip down and go for it and everything. And again, killer nun, nunsploitation. It feels like it should be going there, and it's not actually doing it. But this is a kind of a minor complaint, because once you realize that it's kind of telling a fictionalized version of a real story, it becomes a little more interesting, because that's not what's happening in the real life. In the real life, there wasn't the lesbian nuns and all that stuff, but there was this nun killing people. And so I like the real life aspect to it. It moves away from the exploitation aspect of it at that point and becomes a little bit more of like a, not a biopic, because it's still reveling in some kills like that. It still has some fun kills, but it's not. It doesn't go all the way. The gore is not as extreme as it could have been. The sex is not as extreme as it could have been. So it falls a little short in that sense, but it's still noteworthy again, because it is interesting. Again, the ways of the kills in the movie are far more interesting than they would have been in real life. So it's still having some liberties there. So it's not like a true story, but it's interesting to know that it was inspired by a true story, and that gives the movie a little bit more notoriety, a little bit more weight, and it's why I'm recommending it here to you. So check this one out. It's not a bad movie at all. It's, again, not terribly offensive or anything like that, but it's worth your time for sure. And if you do check it out, let me know what you think. And if you've seen any of these movies, let me know your thoughts on them, especially if you differ from me, so we can have a debate about it, because people like to read those kind of debates in the comments. But that's going to do it for our exploration into the nunsploitation horror subgenre. I do enjoy these movies for what they are. Like, I want to be mindful that they're not the greatest movies by and large, but they're generally fun. And I like religious horror, so these movies tend to be kind of a sweet spot for me, even though they are oftentimes a little schlocky. I can get into some schlock. You know that about me already. So, again, these aren't for everybody, but if they're for you, let's talk about them. But right now, let's talk about Horror Trivia Pursuit, because it's that time for me to read a card to you guys and try to guess this answer live on camera. And let's go with supernatural, because a lot of the movies we talked about today have supernatural aspects. So let's go to the supernatural category. And the question is this. In 2012's Sinister, Ellison Oswalt is which of the following? Cop, novelist, painter, or professor? And I'm pretty sure that I know the answer to this question because I've seen Sinister. I know Sinister. I really like Sinister. We've talked about it before. And this should be a fairly easy question to answer, because it's giving you 4 options. It would be harder if they didn't give you multiple choice, but they're giving you 4 options. And I can tell you right now, looking at the card, 2 of them are definitely not correct. In fact, I do think I know the answer. I'm prattling along a little bit, of course, to give you a chance to think about it. But I'm pretty sure I know the answer. I'm like 99.9% sure I know the answer. But there is a caveat that gives me a pause, because there is a possible second answer on this list that could be correct. And that's because I don't know names. As you know, I don't pay attention to the names of characters very well. I don't retain them very well. And so Ellison Oswald, I don't know who the hell that is. But I'm pretty sure I can deduce it. My deductive reasoning skills are good enough to figure this one out. And I'm going to start explaining this. So lock in your answer now, because I'm going to start thinking a little bit out loud. So, the movie Sinister stars Ethan Hawke, and I'm assuming Ethan Hawke is Ellison Oswald. I'm assuming that because he's the main character and he is a writer in the movie. And I know that for a fact. Now, the reason why I say it gives pause is because the other main character in the movie is a cop, and cop is one of the other suggestions or answers on this card. So, is Ellison Oswalt the writer? Is he Ethan Hawke, or is he the cop? And I'm saying I'm 99.9% sure that he's Ethan Hawke, the writer, because A, that just makes sense, and B, because I am pretty sure that the cop is not actually named in the movie because they call him like Deputy So and So. That's his like kind of nickname. It's kind of a joke that's running throughout the movie. And it's James Ransom who plays him. I'm better with actor names apparently than character names. So I'm pretty sure that Ellison Oswalt is Ethan Hawke and not James Ransom. And so I'm gonna say he is a writer and not the cop. So let's confirm. Novelist, yeah, writer. Yeah, he's the writer. And that's the thing, like, they give him multiple choice and the novelist, I wouldn't have needed that. I would have said writer anyways. But the fact they put cop on the card made me second guess myself. But I didn't change my answer. I stuck with it. So I didn't talk myself out of this one. So I got it. Hopefully you got it too. And if you didn't, let me know what you thought. Were you thinking cop for the same reason that I was talking about it? Let me know in the comments below. But this was fun. I really hope you stuck around to the end. I really hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoy some nunsploitation this weekend. And then maybe we can talk about it in the comments. But until we get to that, until we get to another video, let's just say class dismissed.